Hello. This week on ChatDPS, we pick up where we left off last week, and we're exploring recent reports released on the state of cyber. And then finally, we'll catch up on an article released highlighting the fact that lawyers are finding themselves under attack. So first story this week, the 10th annual State of Smart Manufacturing, Rockwell Automation, insights from more than 1,500 1,500 manufacturing leaders across 17 of the top manufacturing companies, which are stating that 61% of cybersecurity professionals plan AI adoption as manufacturing faces increasing cyber risks. Among external risks to manufacturing, cybersecurity is ranked highly at 30%. Coming in second only to inflation and economic growth, which stands at 34%. 38% of manufacturers intend to utilize data from current sources to enhance protection, making cybersecurity a leading smart manufacturing use case. This one's sort of like captured my imagination a little bit because there's a manufacturing hub coming up very, very soon here in Brisbane, and we've been asked to speak at that event, which is kind of interesting. But really, the underlying thing here is the fact that there is so much sort of undercurrent to all of this, that there is mistrust, is what I think I'm witnessing here, because the manufacturing is it's a very small part of the economy, but it's actually so important. I don't know, guys, where are we beginning with this one? Robert, do you want to have a stab at that one?
Sure. I mean, I guess, we've looked at various sectors. I'm not sure if manufacturing in this case extends to also things like OT, the operational technology, but I think that's maybe something to consider. So I guess there's a couple of things. One is, the manufacturing process itself and automation, bringing AI in there, both in terms of, I guess, efficiencies, but also to help with threat detection. And I guess it would also go to devices that form OT and a broader sort of technology envelope that organizations would have. So, I mean, I guess with everything, I think it always starts with, okay, if you're going to be bringing in some sort of AI solution, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the risk profile of your organization, and how do I implement this in a way that fits in with that risk assessment? The governance framework meets all compliance requirements. So it shouldn't just be knee-jerk reacting to the cyber threat or the threat to your particular business. In this case, the manufacturing sector. You need to be sort of taking a step back from the leadership. So this is the board, this is the executive layer, and actually trying to figure out what it is you're trying to solve. So yes, we know that there's all of these increased threats out there. Obviously manufacturing has its own unique sort of threats, because they'll be heavily focused on automation and robotics and that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
you need to be tailoring your solutions to your organization and what risks you face, and making sure that you don't just simply go, okay, let's just grab something off the shelf. And as we touched on probably last week and maybe the week before, we've had that report come out from MIT, which suggests that 95% of these AI implementations across various sectors are just not working. They're not delivering on their return on investment. So you actually do need to think these things through before you actually implement the solution.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I was looking at it from an intellectual property perspective and the protection of that intellectual property. I mean, Adam, I don't know whether you've got any observations on this one.
There's two sides to this, which is interesting. So the intellectual property is an interesting spoke on it. But if you think about the amount of attacks that have happened throughout the years that are about upstream and downstream when it comes to your supply chain, one of the things that manufacturing are trying to get, if we talk about manufacturing of green boards, for example, for these devices, there's a lot of risk of implanting malware, putting in backdoors, changing things when it's being manufactured and then sent out to people. The second one, the manufacturing industry in itself is a bit circular. So like if you go back to the 20s, it was unionization, and then there was OS that came in then in the 60s and 70s and 80s to protect things. And now we've got robots. And originally robots in a manufacturing idea, if we use car manufacturing as an example, you had a robot that put a wheel on, you had a robot that twisted a screw, you had a robot that did each singular thing. Now what they're trying to do is they're trying to increase their rewards and yield from their investment by having a robot that does 12 things. and they're
Mhm.
utilizing new technologies in this case, like different types of data models and AI models to be able to run them. And then the issue that we have then is the more that a robot does, the more chance of failure. So for manufacturing looking insularly, they have another risk to think about. And it's interesting that it's sitting there right underneath inflation as a business risk, which is, it's never happened before that a technology risk has ever set that.
It is an interesting one, and I think the perspectives that, I mean, obviously the layering all of those things in over the top, it makes it does. I forget. I think manufacturing makes up somewhere in the region of 10%, 12% or whatever it is of total jobs, which is, sort of like, it's not massive, but it's significant in terms of where things are going. And these guys have got a really big challenge ahead of them in terms of differentiation and in terms of being able to take their products to market. So there's some real big challenges in there. Moving on, what was interesting in the 2025 penetration testing intelligence report was there were a couple of things, but there was one in particular I want to focus in on. So the first one was broken access control accounted for 32% of high severity findings across 4,200 plus pen tests, making it the most prevalent vulnerability. Cloud misconfigurations and excessive permissions vulnerabilities were found in 42% of cloud environments that were pen tested. Probably no surprise to you, Adam, at all. APIs in technology and SaaS providers' environments saw a 400% spike in critical vulnerabilities. I've got this background with data protection, and we always think that data protection is always seen as the poor cousin in terms of, sort of like people's take up of it. But it would appear to me as if the API sector, and having done a little bit of research on this now, I'm finding out that take up on this is really low, like something similar level to data protection. And I'm really concerned about this because obviously it has such a significant part of what we do. And if we just throw, stuff at the dartboard. I mean, obviously that's where we started with Optus, with the major breach with Optus, the API, bad API management, and open back doors. Adam, let's start with you on this one because this was a shock to me. 400% spike in critical vulnerabilities, and that is a significant number, right?
Yeah, it's huge. There's a systemic issue across the industry at the moment, and it has to do with architecture. So, what people are doing is they're getting too close to the architecture. So, an architecture for an API, people are saying, "Oh, you've got to use React, or you've got to use Java, or C# or whatever language," and they're like, when they do the architecture, it's like, this is the model based in the language, based on the thing. And the issue is they haven't actually sat back and gone, hey, how does our API work? What kind of data does it have access to? What kind of calls should we allow it to have? What kind of encryption does it utilize? And a real architecture for an API just states those things. It doesn't matter what you write it in. It doesn't matter anything, but how it connects. It's the old basics. Back when I started working in the 90s, I was a network engineer at Cable Monkey, and my very first foray into working was putting in top secret networks for the Air Force. So I was putting in networks and laying cable in the roof. And even back then, we thought, how do people access? What is it they're accessing? How is it they connect? And what we've forgotten in the age of API are those three questions. And if we ask them at the very start, then what happened with Optus and what's happening across the back, it will slow down because criminals are opportunistic, which means if it's easy, they will spike to it. So you can see the huge spike towards the legal field, the huge spike towards the medical field, the huge spike from a technology perspective into APIs because it's the easiest attack vector.
Yeah. Robert, any add-ons to that?
Yeah, probably a couple of things. I think when we talk about API vulnerability in Optus, we should probably use the word allegedly.
Allegedly.
Because Optus have never actually come out and confirmed what actually happened. So I guess we have to wait for the various court cases to go through. But obviously that is the rumors that caused it. So yeah, I guess a couple of things. There are some phrases that get thrown around, like security by design, privacy by design. I think security by design probably applies here. They get thrown around, but they probably never actually get implemented. But yeah, the idea that when you're thinking about opening up an API that the engineering team works hand in glove with the security team is probably a nice to have, but often doesn't happen in reality. So I guess there's that point. Again, I guess it comes back to governance, risk assessment. When you put these things in, and somebody should be asking those questions, you should be clearly engaging with the security team as well as engineering and IT operations and everyone else. I suppose the other thing, the other side of it, of course, is when you're looking and doing your risk assessment, which you should be doing, is what information is being exposed. So Adam kind of touched on that, but you need to then think about that from a privacy point of view, and that's where Optus allegedly got pinged because they may have left, the front door open with the API, and then it was then just a matter of time for that particular hacker to go through and extract huge amounts of data allegedly. So there's the engineering security side of things. But then through that risk assessment in terms of saying, okay, so what would be the impact of opening up this particular portal into the organization? What information might be exposed? And, what can we do to protect that? And I suppose monitoring comes into it as well. So just thinking about it from, again, an IT operations point of view. So it's one thing to set it up. It's another thing to actually actively monitor and see what activity is happening around that API. So you can, do some checks, have some alarms going off, and just be able to jump on it if you do suspect suspicious activity. So there's lots of elements to think about, but it all begins with, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What are the impacts? What's the risk around this? And it's got to come back to those conversations. And unfortunately, far too often those conversations are just not happening in a thorough enough way up and down the organizations.
Yeah, that's
one
a
other
really
thing on
good
that one, Nick.
Yeah,
One other
sure.
thing on that one. For everybody who is listening who has a business that utilizes multiple APIs, one layer down from this report, lots of the time attackers are attacking the logic between APIs. So you have an API speaking to an API that pulls data and sends it to another API, which then sends it out to the output, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of the time they just abuse that in the way to get information that they shouldn't have access to. And how your APIs speak to each other is, if we were to look at this report to say 400% spike, I would say that 80% of that 400 is utilizing breaks between APIs.
Right. Yeah. Interesting thought, right? Finally, this afternoon, we're going to come a little bit more closer to home. There's a new startup business called Optimal. OPTML. Cyber threats against Australian law firms are accelerating, with 81% of firms targeted by phishing in 2024. The legal sector is now firmly in the crosshairs, they're saying. So these guys have set themselves up, and there's some interesting sort of ideas that they've put forward. So the article is suggesting that cyber risk to law firms is up considerably. Phishing and business email compromised. Ransomware and data encryption are a risk. Weak cyber preparedness and resource constraints. Escalating geopolitical threats and human error and knowledge leakage. As targets, lawyers hold intellectual property on behalf of their customers, which is quite clearly, makes them an attractive proposition from a targeting perspective. Robert, as a lawyer, are lawyers doing more than most? I mean, my experience has been that lawyers want to do more, or want to be seen to be doing more than most. Is that actually the case, you think?
I think so. I think you often see this. You often see this by sector. Of some of the more recent major data breaches, one that occurred in the legal sector was HWL Ebsworth, and we can't talk too much about it because they put an injunction out to stop people talking about it in detail. But that was a fairly major law firm, and the information and it's not just IP, but it's personal information, and it can be sensitive information as well, so related to health records and the like. So what you tend to find is if there's a major data breach within a sector, it makes that particular sector wake up. So I think what you'll find within the legal sector is like, we don't want to be the next HWL Ebsworth, because it's interesting because there's kind of two sides to it. Because on the one hand, one of the consequences of the impact on Ebsworth is that clients will flow to other law firms who are either perceived or validated as being more secure. There is incentive for law firms to demonstrate greater levels of security of information, because I know from my experience, particularly when you start dealing with larger clients, particularly in the financial services sector, they will send out significantly, large surveys of a law firm's capability when it comes to protecting data. So they're expecting a certain level of data protection. And as I say, I think when there's a major data breach like that, there's incentives to uplift your cybersecurity posture to show that actually you've got protections in place that will keep it's private sector financial services, or whether it's government, public sector, sensitive data, whatever it might be, there's incentives there to uplift. So I think law firms are very conscious of this. It's always going to depend on the size of the law firm as well. So obviously medium and large law firms can invest more in these in cyber resilience and uplift. Smaller law firms, less so. I mean, you see those challenges in other sectors as well. So it's a case of, again, risk assessments, client base, the information that you hold, what can you do to protect that data? What are the layers you can put in place? And then this comes back to, again, protecting the crown jewels, that discussion again. So law firms in particular will hold a lot of sensitive data. So they should be looking at encryption as one defense against data breach. So yeah, look, it's very much a live topic in the law firm sector, and yeah, I don't think anyone wants to be the next HW or Ebsworth. That's the fact.
Yeah, Adam.
This is an interesting one. I would say that the numbers of attacks on law firms specifically has absolutely gone up. But are they as vulnerable as it says? Like, it'd be interesting to see. So 81%, there was an 81% increase in phishing attacks, right? And something like a 35% of businesses cite that they had a budget or talent gap. But I wonder how that would stack up against manufacturing or retail or any of the other side of things. Like, is it an anomaly and they're in a really bad state, or is it we've just started to record it and they're just as vulnerable as other areas? I'd like to ask that question across the board.
Yeah, and I don't think it was really clear. I think there was some stats. It's that old, sort of lies into statistics thing. I mean, this phishing thing was really what caught the eye. And I think it's around social engineering. So it's just trying to make sure that people are, sort of like aware of these things. Data protection is undoubtedly really important to legal firms in order to be able to protect the data of their customers and their customers' customers. So, I mean, that's really what that's all about. And if they're not doing it, a law firm that's not doing it really does need to have, have an audit done just to make sure they know what they're doing. The majority of them, I think, do. I mean, there's some very, very competent, IT facilities out there, security services people that work in those organizations. I think these guys, Optimal, are actually going in from a management cutting perspective and saying, hey, look, we offer this full suite of offerings, and there's a range of different things that you need to be aware of, which is really useful. I mean, it's bringing people's attention to the fact that there's a problem, and they're there to help, I guess. So that's a good thing. Okay, well, that was ChatDPS for this week. Guys, thank you very much, and look forward to catching up with you very soon.